Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get started. This is our very first FY20 operating budget and CIP amendments work session for the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. We welcome Councilmember Hucker today to our committee work session, and we do have 6 items, so we're going to dive right into this work session. Our first item is the Office of Human Resources, and so if you are here for that particular item, please approach the table. Ms. Price has prepared the packet for us, and we'll turn it over to you, Ms. Linda Price, to just let us know what are the highlights and decision points, and then we'll have a discussion if that is necessary and take some votes.
Good afternoon. Thank you. The executive's FY20 recommended budget for the Office of Human Resources is $281,820,607. It's an increase of 5.38%. I will note that the increase in this budget is largely due to an increase in claims expenditures. The full council will actually review this item in full on April 23rd when they take up class compensation issues. So the committee won't have to review that item today. Just going through the packet, a couple things to note. I wanted the committee to receive an update on the hiring process, changes that have been implemented, have the opportunity to go over some of the feedback and lessons learned. There have been a few challenges implementing the process, and I'm sure the council has gotten a lot of feedback throughout the years on this process. And then also there is abolishment of a position for labor and data analysis. It's tied to one of the multi-program adjustments indicated for $176,000. That position has been abolished. I think that further discussion is needed to clarify that item. Going through the packet, there are no other issues that council staff has raised or any items that that council staff does not concur with. But I'm happy to go through them individually if requested.
Turn it over to Ms. Plachinsky to see if there's anything.
Good afternoon, Karen Plachinsky.
Okay, anything you would like to add in response to what Ms. Price has identified?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so, all right, so Ms. Price, you had mentioned issues around just the hiring process, right? Are there any particular questions that we should, that you noted, anything that you noted specifically?
Sure. Specifically, just some of the growing pains with the process. One of the largest items of feedback that they're getting is that the eligible list that has been turned over to departments don't necessarily contain candidates that are deemed to be the most eligible. So somehow they're getting through the system, and people that had applied that were very eligible are somehow not getting through the system. So I think just balancing and being able to respond to that issue would be helpful for the council to know what HR is doing in that respect.
So who would like to answer that?
I will have Kimberly Williams, who is the manager for our class and compensation. She can speak to it. She was one of the folks that implemented the program.
Ms. Williams.
Good afternoon. Yeah, there has been growing pains. We implemented what we call a candidate qualification process last fiscal year. There was a study done back in May of 2015. A recommendation came forward. And one of the things, basically, the administration wanted to look at reducing the time to fill. But the time to fill has various components attached to it. So what the Office of Human Resources did is really focused in on looking at the evaluation process. And so the evaluation process entailed how do we assess whether candidates are qualified, and then moving that process forward to giving our hiring managers the most qualified candidates. And so what we basically did is automated the process by which candidates will apply for jobs. They still apply the normal way. The only difference really was, instead of our OHR department manually touching over 30,000 resumes, what we had them do is have the candidate respond to questions that were based on the job classification minimum requirements. I think that it's an adjustment because it's something new that we had not experienced before, people getting used to having to receive go on and apply for jobs online in a way that they would put their recommendations or their qualifications in a system. There's validation that happens. The Human Resources does look at the candidates that we pass over on the eligible list. I think that some of the pain points was that people may not have seen people on the list that they were expecting, but that is based on the way candidates were responding to the questions.
Okay, so are there any particular ways that you're trying to then improve that process?
Sure, we have done numerous training sessions to help people get, adjusted to how to respond to it. I think one of the biggest learnings is that individuals may not know exactly what's in their job classification. So the job classification is the source of the evaluation tool. So if the minimum requirements that are stated in the job classification, they're the same minimum qualifications that are a part of the candidate qualification process. There are also what we call factors, and they're pretty much very similar to federal factors, such as complexity of work and things like that, that they may be answering questions that they had not answered in the past. In the past, they would upload a resume, and then someone would manually look at all of the jobs that they performed and determine whether they were minimally qualified. So it's just a different way in which candidates are responding to questions. I think that the thing that we have to do is do more training and education, which we continue to do to this day. I do think that some of the changes that we've made in terms of working with our departments more upfront to help them understand what they should be putting out on the job announcements, educating employees, I think it will change and has changed some of the feedback that we're receiving.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying that now candidates themselves are going to have to describe according to the particular areas of qualifications, et cetera, that they have to input that information? Is that what you're saying?
Yep, so what happens is when a candidate applies, we will ask them, instead of us determining whether you have the relevant experience by looking at your resume, we will ask you, what your education is. You just click whether you graduated, if it requires a bachelor's degree, what school you graduated from, we ask them to input their years of experience, and we also identify the relevant areas that are needed for the job and ask them to select areas that represent the work that they have done. And then there's other questions specifically related to the preferred criteria that the department will ask candidates for.
So that's where you say the training needs to occur? Because the
Training
departments...
occur for all of it, though, even the first part. So the first part is minimum qualification, whether you have the relevant education or relevant degree needed to do the job, and not all jobs require a degree. The second portion of
That piece assumes that you're going to train the applicants.
and we have done that. We have gone out into the communities.
So that's the first piece, is you're training the people who are applying in a specific manner so they understand what the new process is. So that you have to strengthen that because there are some issues there.
Yes.
Okay, and then the
It's a
departments.
different look and feel, so we
Yeah.
we definitely have to continue training and educating. There are numerous people who apply who are external, so of course we're not going to reach all of those external, but we do work with our community groups to train and educate the people from those communities so that they're familiar with the process. And then there's also internal training for employees as well as for managers.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. I have one on the, I look forward to a more robust conversation about the self-insurance fund. And I have lots of questions on it, but I will save them for full committee. But obviously that seems to be a pretty significant number, and I'm just, interested to learn about, what happened, how it happened, whether it's a normal situation and just a regular change to missing what the projections were, whether there's some type of, larger issue that needs to be addressed. But I did have specific questions on the elimination of the M1 position. And my understanding is that that position is your position. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So that your position is expected to be eliminated on July 1st?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then what happens with the role that you're currently in? What happens to the role that you're currently in on July 1st?
director-
You seem like you're in a pretty significant and important position, and I appreciate all of the hard work that you're doing, so I'm just a little bit confused.
So if the director's not appointed by then, this position, I will still continue to act until such time a director is appointed.
So the idea of this is that you're going to continue in the role
As act,
unless and until a full-time director gets put in. Once a full-time director is there, the position that you previously held before you were acting will be eliminated?
yes,
And that position's functions will be where? And obviously, the director position will, the role that you're serving in now is the idea that the role that you used to have is now being done by other people while you're taking on the director?
It'll be assumed by other folks, other managers within the office, yes.
If I could just jump in and add a little background, this position was one of the positions that had been identified when the executive had transmitted Bill 319 establishing the non-merit positions. So this position had been outlined as one that was going to be abolished in order to create the savings to pay for the new positions that were going to be created.
Yeah, and I think that, it'll be interesting to see, because we were told that there were savings if there's not a new director in place by July 1, as was part of this discussion. Those savings will not be realized as projected. So that's one piece of this, which I think is important, and I'm still hopeful that we will be getting back, the specific tangible actuals of what the savings turn out to be, which was one of the requests that the committee had. This would be another example of changes that happen, which, are part of running a large organization. Things happen, I understand that, but, that reflect the fact, bless you, that the projections of what was expected to be saved and what will actually be saved are probably going to be quite different.
May I?
Of course.
Jenna Shovlin, OHR. One of the things to keep in mind, Mr. Friedson, is the M1 position will be abolished, so there will be no funding associated with it. However, there is an appropriation attached to the director's position, so any expenses that are applied to the acting director will be applied against that position, and then once the new director is hired, we'll have a better understanding as to what the variance is going to be against that appropriation, but there will be savings associated with the M1 reduction because that appropriation will go away.
I have more questions about that on a future item, because I'm not sure that seems to be exactly the case across the board, but I'll have some more questions about that in a future item. I did also have then questions similarly to the previous bill on the labor position. And if we could just get a little bit more clarity, it was my understanding, based on the robust discussion that we had here, that the idea behind this change, the chief labor officer change, we had quite an extensive discussion about where that should be and how it should be and to whom it should report, and ended up where we ended up for a series of reasons, not least of which is the charter and what limitations the charter presents. And we gave, I think appropriately, a considerable amount of deference to the county executive to set up a government that he sees fit to serve the needs of the county and our residents. My understanding was that the positions that dealt with labor relations, which had historically been within the Office of Human Resources, was going to be moved externally to this separate position and report directly to the Chief Labor Relations Officer, who would report to the CAO and have constant and regular and consistent communication with the county executive. That is what the situation was. Is that what's happening here? Is this labor position being moved to outside this department that we're talking about right now, but to report directly to the Chief Labor Relations Officer, or is there something else happening?
This position is being abolished. There's no shift in FTEs from the Office of Human Resources to the Executive's Office for the work that had been done by the Senior Lead Performance Management and Data Analyst. That position is currently vacant, so right now the work is being split with the contractor as well as with OMB. But yes, this position is being abolished with this budget, and at this point, there is no new position that's being transferred to the executive's office or being created in the executive's office related to labor support outside of the chief labor officer.
And is there a plan, I mean, based off of that, in the future of moving the folks in OHR who are performing the labor relations function?
Once a chief labor relations officer is appointed, we will be working with that individual in terms of defining what moves over to that particular to his organization. So all of those details are still being worked out at this point in time.
Okay, so at some point, there might be FTEs that are moved to that, but the idea is to wait until the chief labor relations officer
Yes, sir.
is in place before moving them, because they would have nobody to report to, which makes sense to me. Okay, thank you.
Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. I guess I'm a little confused about the training of the applicant. How are you training the applicant?
The Office of Human Resources Recruitment area, they will conduct sessions that help them go through, like, how do you apply for a job? They teach them about what things to expect when they go in and apply for the job, what's different than what they did in the past. Like, for example, they may walk through an example that says, in the past, you have submitted a resume. Now, here's what you would go through and do to apply for a job.
And how often would you do that type of training? I mean, I'm assuming you have applicants come in every day.
Sure, and that's the point I was making, that we work with community groups. That's the best way to handle the external folks. And then and I'll let Karen, because I know that there's some recruitment efforts that are happening. I'm not in the recruitment area, but we work with some community groups and also with specific departments in terms of, hey, what kind of training can we offer you or help you in terms of making sure that not only applicants understand, but also the managers and supervisors. And we've done numerous trainings over the past year. I don't have the count with me, but we have done several training sessions.
Please.
We offer training on a monthly basis for employees, and we work with the community groups and have taken out to the libraries and other locations probably once a quarter.
Now, do you put that on your website and say, I mean, if somebody's not a member of a community group or whatever, and they
It's
want to apply?
on the public libraries website, because we coordinate with the public libraries. We do quarterly trainings there, and then we work with the other groups as well when they call and ask us to come out. So we take the show on the road, work with the regional service centers as well.
Well, and I applaud that, and I appreciate that, but I would sincerely suggest that you place it on your own website. If someone's applying for a job, then they're going to not necessarily look at the library's website, they're going to look at, yours. And so it should be sort of cross-referenced. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's what was a bit confusing to me, because I honestly don't think that is the most efficient way for us as county government to go about trying to facilitate applying for a county government job. We need to figure out how to be intuitive and user-friendly. So whether it's definitely on the website, or whether there could be a short sort of video that literally walks you through it, prompts as you're filling out the application that explains what it is that you're required. Because the whole point was to make this a lot, more user-friendly, and also for there to be a quicker turnaround, because that is a problem that we have faced for quite a while, and it's no longer acceptable. I mean, the whole idea was that we were going to go through this, sort of revamp process. So we wouldn't go through this. We go through these budget processes, and then we approve all these budgets for different agencies, and then we come back the next year and hear that there are positions that took like 6, 7, 8 months to fill. And meanwhile, our constituents are expecting all these services, and we're thinking that they're getting the services. And a lot of that has to do with OHR. And I am mindful that, there are particular processes you have to follow, and there are laws and there are regulations and things like that. But it doesn't make me feel comfortable to know that we have to engage in training applicants so that they know how to apply for our jobs.
I think that you're absolutely right. I think we were trying to be a little more proactive in making sure that, because it was a shift from just uploading your resume to now, going in and responding to questions that we thought it would be helpful to go out and not only train applicants, but to train managers. But remember, the initiative was originally to try to find out what's causing the bottleneck in terms of the time to fill. And the time to fill has various components to it, but one of the areas that probably took the most amount of time was the evaluation. So every time an applicant applies in the old world, OHR touches every single resume. And that means basically 30,000 resumes come in a year. And so they touch every last one of them. And then after they touch them to say they're minimally qualified by looking at a piece of paper, they then would turn it over to a rater reviewer who would then touch the next 30% of those.
No, and I appreciate that, because we've gone through that here in this committee many times. I do appreciate that, obviously, that, that system, it took a lot longer. But I think that now that we've shifted into this other, system, we still are finding that there is this gap where people may not understand exactly what they need to upload or how they need to describe certain things, and therefore we're having still that lag. So, I think our expectation is just, and I'm sure you're doing this, is just to figure out what is the most intuitive way and user-friendly way that applicants, when they go in, can, easily follow the process and be as thorough as possible and hopefully as objective as possible, so that you get to your end result. You know what I'm saying?
No,
Versus
I
us now creating another layer that is just going to get us back to the
I think
starting
early
point.
on, what you were probably seeing was when you turn on a new system, sometimes there's little glitches in it. And it wasn't so much that the process was hard, but because we were marrying the system with our existing system, there were some glitches that we fixed immediately when we found out about it. The second portion of it was really about us as a county getting comfortable with, now we're receiving these qualified candidates or highly qualified candidates in a different way. It did not go through everyone touching it. It went through a process where applicants provided us with their credentials, rather than us looking at their resume and deciding that these are the credentials. So I think this is just a shift in how we look at things, but I do agree with you, we do have to find ways to make it easier for people to understand what the process is for applying for a job in the county.
And Ms. Price, I think as a committee, we'll have further conversations about coming back to understand then where are we doing in terms of our metrics, in terms of, after you work through some of this. And then the other question I had, just following up on the abolishing of the senior lead performance management and data analyst position, which we were told that obviously during budget is when we were going to then address that, not through the bill, because the bill did not abolish position, right? It was going to be through the budget process that we would get to that point.
Correct, and it's the M1 position, but yes.
Sure, okay, but, so the abolishing of this particular one, so the duties of this particular position, how are those gonna be carried out then under the new restructured proposal?
You're speaking of the M1?
No.
The senior lead performance management and data analyst position,
I
is
believe
that
you
something,
are,
that's vacant,
I
right?
believe you're referring to the M1 position that was tied to the bill.
Okay, so where is that in your packet? Is that reflected
that-
here?
That is on page 5. At the bottom of page 5.
Okay, there it is. Yes, that one. Okay. So this one was in business operations and performance, but now it has been shifted to recruitment and selection. So this is just a shift?
Yeah,
So this is
correct.
not we're not abolishing that one?
The position, correct, the position was shifted to recruitment and selection, but it is abolished in recruitment and selection. It's the same position, it's just been shifted and shown in a different program, but it does abolish the M1 position that was indicated in Bill 319.
Okay. And the rationale behind that was just, again,
Savings for the non-merit positions.
okay. All right. So any other questions from my colleagues? Councilmember Fritzen.
Yeah, just one follow-up question on that. When we opened up the packet, I remembered my other question, and I do want to just associate myself with both the council president and vice president on the issue of how easy it is to apply for jobs. And I think that that is, fundamental to what we do is making sure that we have a workforce that is agile and responsive and that we're filling the jobs that we're funding. I mean, all we can do is allow for positions to exist. It's up to the executive branch to fill them and ensure the right people are there, and that's why OHR plays such a critical role, and this is just of absolute utmost importance. And secondarily to that, I am particularly concerned, and I think that there is another reason why people aren't applying to jobs is because they don't know who the department head is going to be in different agencies. And I wouldn't want to join a company or a department where I didn't know who the director or the CEO or whomever would be, because leadership starts at the top. And I am concerned and continue to be concerned about the number of departments that don't have permanent full-time directors. With all due respect to Ms. Placzynski, who you're doing a terrific job, but I think that that level of consistency and confidence that is showed by the county executive and the CAO to the department head, and then the confidence that is felt to the department is significant. So it'd be helpful if you have the number of directors and assistant directors that are either vacant currently or are currently filled by an acting position, an acting role. If you don't have it now, that's totally fine, but if you could share that with us as part of this continued ongoing conversation of how do we get the workforce going, how do we get folks into positions, I think that's true of all of the positions in the agency, and I think it's particularly true because it starts at the top.
We can share those with you.
Yes, Vice President.
But to that degree, for the department heads, which obviously where many of the vacancies, or some of the vacancies are located, that wouldn't be through you, that would be through the county executive. So,
Yeah, but I would assume that you would have the total workforce and, all of the benefits and everything else eventually come through you, and so you know who's in positions and what the vacancies are. Am I missing that? Okay, so you would have, even though you're not necessarily hiring these people directly, it's not through this is two separate issues. One is the application, how easy it is to apply and get employment in county government, which is a critical issue. And my point is related to that, but completely separate, is the idea of, who are running our different departments and whether or not that has a role, because I happen to think, at least philosophically, that could be discouraging folks from applying to jobs because they don't know who the head of the department's going to be. And I certainly, as somebody who has applied to jobs before, wouldn't be as keen on applying to a job in a place where I didn't know that the leadership was going to be there for a long period of time. And I would want to have a job for a long period of time, and I would want to know what the culture and what the emphasis of the job and the role in the department was. The last question that I was reminded of, the M1 position, which I wasn't aware when we talked about the original bill, but was part of this packet, which I appreciated. That's partially funded by general fund and partially funded with the self-insurance fund. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And how does that, what impact does that have? Was the $750,000 that we were told during that bill process, was that general fund savings, or was that also including special funds like self-insurance funds and others?
I don't believe that there was any distinction at that time which fund the savings would be coming from.
Corey Orlowski with OMB. It was all funds, primarily general funds, however. We can get that breakout as we report back on the final savings.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that, so thank you for saying that. I think it would be helpful because, all funds are, it's all taxpayer dollars in different ways, but not all funds are created equally. So if you could break that out on all the positions, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, any objection to the recommendation of our council staff? Okay, with that objection, we will adopt the recommendation for the Office of Human Resources. Thank you so much for being here today. Okay. All right, so now we're going to move to the Board of Elections.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Just a brief introduction of everybody, but first, congratulations on all your elections. Good work. We'll start. Next to me is I'm Jim Shalik, President of the Board. This is Nahid Kozame, Vice President, David Naiman and Alan Banoff, members of the Board of Elections. And we have Margaret Jurgensen, our election director, and Alison McLaughlin. Do we have a chair for her?
She's gonna take
If the
where
three
we're
of you
at.
can shift down, I can sit with Margaret.
Okay. Anyway, first, just a couple of bullet points. Thank you for your support in the past. And later I'll thank Councilman Hucker for what he's been doing lately for us, too. But I want to thank you for your support in the past. We have, okay, we're getting organized there? Okay. Oh, I'm down here, okay. Turn that off.
Music have to stop when?
Yeah, okay.
The Board of Election, what do you
Turn it off.
expect?
Never chaos.
A couple of bullet points. One, recently, we just went over 717,000 eligible voters. We're bigger than, and I've been told, 5 states and the District of Columbia. So we've got a huge operation. If you thought the gubernatorial election was hot and busy, 2020 is going to be wildly busy and enthusiastic. On the Democratic primary ballot, we're expecting well over 100 delegates to the Democratic convention. Even though the field may be winnowed down by our primary, delegate candidates can't come off the ballot. So our machines are going to be really cooking. In the past, we've done the best we can with the materials we had. In the last election, we had some scanner breakdowns because the ballot was 5 pages. As Councilman Hucker knows, we had some problems in Burtonsville and other areas where lines were very long, up to 2 hours at a time. So equipment and manpower is crucial for us. We're here to answer your questions, and hopefully you'll approve what we're asking for. But, thank you again for your support.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Ms. Myhill, can you please walk us through the packet, and then we'll turn it over to Councilmember Hucker, who has given us also a memo with a request.
Absolutely. I'll just dive right into the expenditure issues that start on page 3 of the packet. As you know, the Board of Election budget cycles depending on the different elections that are in the fiscal year. And so the first 2 issues are really just more technical election year fluctuations, same service adjustments. And so I'll go straight to page 4. And as you are aware, the General Assembly passed bills that would provide for same-day voter registration. At the time of creating the recommended budget, that the outcome of those bills wasn't clear, but now they have passed. While they've not been signed by the governor, I don't think anyone's really expecting him to veto them either. So it is council staff's recommendation to add $400,000 to the reconciliation list to implement the same-day voter registration.
Is there any conversation with the executive to see if he would send a supplemental request instead of us having to put this on the reconciliation list, which will compete with all the other needs and?
Crystal Salee, Office of Management and Budget. There hasn't been a discussion regarding that topic yet. But during the CE review, Ms. Jurgensen did make mention that there may be a future need for supplemental appropriation.
And Ms. Jurgensen, what would be the absolute sort of deadline by which we would either have to get, a supplemental or a special appropriation?
Our recommendation, Margaret Jurgensen, Election Director, our recommendation would be that we would like to come before the county executive as well as county council no later than August and that will also, August of this year, because that will also allow us to understand what the implications of the regulation by the State Board of Elections will be related to same-day voter registration.
So just for my colleagues on the committee, I think that would be my inclination, is that we, commit to, of course, we can send a memo to the executive, requesting that he send over a supplemental once everything is a bit more clarified, and if for some reason he does not, then we can, consider then a special appropriation, but I don't think it's necessary to put that in a reconciliation list that's going to be competing with so many other pressing needs. So if there's no objection to that strategy, we'll do that, Ms. Jurgensen. Mr. Naiman.
Thank you, David Naiman from the Board of Elections. One other item that you might consider in a similar category, the legislature approved legislation that allows local boards with the state board's approval to add an additional early voting site. We haven't I mean, the legislation was just passed, so we haven't done anything with it yet, but we could end up coming to you for that as well if we do approve an additional site.
We definitely would like to consider that as well. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
we did talk to the county executive with regards to that specific issue also in meetings prior to, during the development of the budget.
Okay, wonderful. Great. Okay, so I think we'll address that particular issue in that way. And anything else?
The other two items on, under expenditure issues are really just for your information. One is the automatic voter registration implementation. Board staff didn't feel like they could, the recommended operating budget doesn't include funding for that, and while they expect an additional workload, at this point it's difficult to quantify, so there's nothing in the budget on this, so it may just be part of that supplemental appropriation.
Okay, so we'll track that as well.
Yeah, and the last is the committee is always interested in the board's education and outreach program, and so we have some material in the packet just for your information on that issue.
Excellent. Councilmember Hucker, you have a memo for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair and colleagues. I think the chairman framed it very well. Everyone has a right to vote, but despite our best efforts in the past, at times our operations and capacity haven't kept up with rising voter demand. And according to the board, last November, when we had increased turnout, we had 12 problematic precincts where voters stood in line significantly more than the average of half an hour. And while this was a county-wide phenomenon, at the one precinct that I observed personally in East County, there was a surge in voter turnout, there were limited staff on the ground, and there were equipment failures. And so I called Ms. Jurgensen at the time. I talked to board members, see what we could do. I'm sure you were probably doing the same in other precincts, and they were getting calls from all over the county. And they were able to send over, thank you, one staffer and one scanner at the time, but there's only so much to go around. So in Burtonsville, at least, where I saw firsthand, and Mr. Naaman was nice enough to come out, we had a lot of voters standing in line to 2 to 3 hours, and I talked to many of them personally. And we had a lot of people standing in line for a long time and then having to leave without voting, which was doubly frustrating. It's bad enough to stand in line for 2 hours and then be able to cast your vote, but when you have to leave because you're a senior and you can't stand that long, you're disabled. Former chief judge in the precinct was among those who had to leave early, and a lot of parents and caregivers who just had to leave to pick up children and others that they were taking care of, especially around rush hour. So in my conversations with some of the elections experts, I think we could address some of these deficiencies by adding 125 to the rec list, 85,000 for equipment, 40,000 for additional staff time. So especially in the light of the surge in voter registration, voter turnout expected in 2020, that's my suggestion.
Thank you. And so similarly, I just have the question of, is this something that we need to appropriate right now, or is this something that we can do in a supplemental or a special appropriation?
Madam Chair, when we were working with the county executive in the budget office, we did include additional equipment. We had done an analysis of what exactly had happened in those 12 precincts as well as others. So we have already ordered additional equipment and as well as additional poll books, printers, and peripherals that go with that, and voting booths, et cetera. Obviously, if we don't use it for the primary, we'll definitely be using it for the general election. But the county executive did include additional equipment, plus when the state board is planning for elections, they anticipate, obviously, growth, especially here in Montgomery County, and so they always build on our inventory. So we do believe that currently the equipment that we have, in light of the primary election, 25% of the voters are not affiliated, will not be voting in the primary election because they can't participate in a partisan election. With the additional equipment that was included in the county executive's budget, we could meet the needs to serve the community, but we will always be happy to take more equipment.
what was the additional equipment of the executive? I don't have that in front of me right now.
It's 76 units, scanner units, 140 additional printers, 140 poll books, 140 printers, 140 network that goes with the, and I believe it was 37 ballot marking devices.
And Councilmember Hooker, was that your analysis was in addition to what the executive had included? So this is, you believe, is needed?
That's what I
In
believe is
addition-
needed
on
on
top
top
of
of
what
what's
he
in the
has-
budget. I mean, you can see the budget includes just a 0.71% increase from the FY19 budget. So they're a thin operation to begin with, and there's not much of an increase planned in the FY20 budget.
Well, I mean, but they did add some things. So in terms of the equipment that they added, you still think that that is just going to be inadequate?
That's my impression. I also, I don't know how much of the current equipment failed last year or is anticipated to fail in the, when we're there on election day and there's machines that are failing in real time on election day. That's something we obviously have to plan for.
Mr. Hucker, the staff is in the process right now, and we'll be happy to come before the GO Committee again to address how we're going to stage things differently for the 2020 election. The geography of the county does present some unique issues trying to get equipment from our location to Prasen or Silver Spring and other locations. And we are in the process of planning to make sure that there's more than enough equipment, as well as staging it in such a manner that we can expedite delivery.
Yes. And then
Madam Chair,
turn
I'm
to my
sorry.
colleagues. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, I just want to say, speaking for the 4 board members that are here, we support Council Member Hucker's position 100%. We need more equipment, and the new scanners will not only be used in those 12 sites where those wait times were outrageous, it's terrible, that we need backup scanners because when there's a breakdown, we got to get replaced scanners, and it takes a while to replace them. And the next election is crucial, and it's going to be so heated and animated, and turnout's going to be unbelievable. So we support Councilmember Hucker's recommendation. You can't have too many machines because the right to vote is the most important right we have. So
Absolutely.
we're behind them 100%.
150%.
You got it.
All right. Let me just turn to Council Vice President Katz. And then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, I do support Tom's as well. How long does it take once you order equipment to actually get the equipment?
It just depends what kind of the equipment. For the poll books, we're hoping to get them by December. The scanners, we anticipate that we would get those in September of this year. It depends if they need to be manufactured.
Well, and obviously, that's my concern. If they do need to be manufactured, it's going to take longer to get something, and if you're ordering it, and then I guess the other question that I have, do we know for sure that this is the way that we're going to be voting in 2020? Do we know that we're going to be using the same equipment that we're using now? We do know that for certain?
Yes.
Okay,
And the order for the scanners was submitted in February.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Newman.
Thank you. I want to second what Jim said and thank Councilmember Hucker for his proposal. The 12 precincts, however, are really only the worst examples in terms of the longest wait times. And these are precincts that were identified as averaging a 30-minute wait time, which is what we consider to be a maximum. When I say averaging, that means that half of the time they are more than that. Many of them are for 1 to 2 hours, like Councilmember Hucker was describing. And I know that 9 out of the 12 of those precincts are in either Councilmember Friedson or Councilmember Hucker's district. But if you go to the category of precincts where we still were not meeting our standard, you add, I don't remember the exact number, but a huge additional number than the 12, just to get it so that people, the goal is that no one waits more than half an hour. The second thing I wanted to make sure you all knew was that we were very concerned and still are very concerned about the ability of the electronic poll books to survive the next cycle. We've been told by the state that they are not replacing them. We had hoped that that was not going to be the case, but I think there's a very serious possibility, that we will have more trouble with the electronic poll books than usual, because we were already beginning to see a lot of that, in the last election. And then the final thing I was just going to say is that I think that to consider the 2020 primary like our average, even presidential primary, is kind of missing what's happening in the county and the country. Our turnout for the gubernatorial general was more like a presidential year, and that's without the president on the ballot. I think with the combination of all the candidates for president on the Democratic ballot and all of the people running for delegate, that there'll be an enormous amount of activity, probably higher turnout than we've ever had for a presidential primary, and so I think that the need will be very great.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, and thank you for that, and thank you just, generally to the board and staff. You're the Olympians of democracy. The only difference between the Olympics and you is every 2 years you have to do it twice, with a primary and a general. But I think it's also true, just like with Olympic athletes, that, we only watch them when they are at the Olympics competing, but there is lots of training and diligent work that is happening beyond the scenes that we never have to worry about or think about, except, I guess, if you're like in this situation, you're one of the folks who has to pay for that training and allow them to be excellent when they need to be on the big stage. And so there is a lot of work that I know has to go in the off years that we're prepared for the on years. I happen to agree with you, Mr. Naaman, that I think this is going to be a huge turnout. I think that's a good thing. It does have some budget implications, and we have to be ready for it. Exactly what the timing of that is and what the needs are, I yield to others to give us good recommendations and good advice on what that looks like. But I am really interested in and concerned about making sure that we are prepared for this and that we don't discourage anybody from voting in any way, and that includes having a hour and 15-minute, hour and a half, hour and 45-minute wait time when they got to pick up a kid at daycare or they have to get back to work. And so, what we can do within reason, within the limited budget constraints that we have to be able to prepare for it, I'm inclined to support and just appreciate really, truly all the work that you do, particularly in these times of preparing and thinking about and being methodical and thoughtful. I did have a quick question as well. During the savings plan process, we rejected one of the proposed cuts, which was a bill that hadn't come from the state, and there was a question of when it would come from the state and whether it would be this budget year or next budget year, and I was just curious if that bill has been paid yet, or if we're still waiting for the state to charge us.
We're still waiting for the next two bill payments, or bill requirements. We have not received the third quarter bill from the state, and obviously, we haven't received the fourth quarter bill.
Got it. And the fourth quarter bill usually comes
Well,
after, it usually comes the next fiscal year, or?
yeah, it depends. Sometimes it comes June, July, August. It's
So what-
not consistent.
So what's the total amount of money, the two bills that you have to have in the budget ready to spend if the bill comes, but that isn't encumbered currently?
It is, the monies are encumbered to pay for the bills. There's several different bills that we receive from the state. One is for the Maryland voter registration system. Another is for the State Board of Elections program management. One is for the voting system. Another is for the electronic poll books. And in this case, we're not getting new ones. Instead, we are repairing, refurbishing, and purchasing new printers. And so it's interesting that you asked this question today, because right before I came down here, I was meeting with the State Board of Elections staff person assigned to Montgomery County and said, when are we going to get the information with regards to the costs of the batteries that have to be replaced in the poll books? When are we going to get the final costs on the printers and all of these different elements. So he's going to get back to me supposedly next week.
Great. I think, because that also may relate as well in terms of the council president's point about timing, where those bills could be coming in later, and the timeline for, to have a special appropriation may be appropriate as well, and, which the impetus of my question, which I think seems like it's totally unrelated to the conversation that we're having now, but I think in some ways, in terms of the timing of when we need to fund these different things and what monies are available in order to keep things going on time, I think is apropos. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Right, and I think that's why, it's important to kind of get all these details. That's why we're having the work session, to just kind of understand the timing piece. This is a committee that has always historically been very interested in how do we foster voter participation, and how do we do everything we can to help you make sure that that is, that the capacity is there, and that our residents really do want to be able to exercise that right. So I think that I'm hearing that we do have support to put this on the reconciliation list. So we'll put this particular piece on there because it does require some lead time in order to place the order for all of this different type of equipment. So I think in that sense, it makes sense to do that. The one piece I just couldn't find in the packet was the issue of outreach, and then I don't know, is that just flat funded? I know in the past we have added additional funding for outreach, and
Yes, it was flat funded.
what is the amount that we have there now?
Of course, our biggest issue, and Herberto and I did a presentation in East County, Herberto Zelaya.
Dr. Z?
And there are some things that we would like to do to the issue of wait times, which I would love to talk to the committee about, but at some point this summer. But there's some things that we would like to do to push out messaging in multiple facets, media, our print media, our sample ballot, to help facilitate voters to show up at the correct polling place on election day, because some of the challenges, there were 12 locations, obviously, that had serious issues, but they were not, all of them did not have the same problem. And one of the big problems was people showing up, well, I voted here before, or let's go here again. And the thing that's bad about that is that just because you showed up at that early voting center does not mean you're getting the correct congressional district ballot, correct legislative ballot, correct council ballot. So we really want to push the message to go to your correct polling place on election day, unless you're going to go early voting or vote by mail.
So what is the budget for outreach?
Outreach is 70,000 for advertising.
75 for advertising and it's 2 FTEs for outreach.
75,000 for advertising and 2 FTEs part-time for outreach. So it's Roberto plus 2 other guys, or 2 other individuals, and we do have our election judge recruitment team that are permanent. We have,
First, I wanted to thank you because you substantially increased that budget last year, which obviously made a huge difference. I think that the kind of outreach that Margaret was just talking about, though, we would be very consistent but not included in what Councilmember Hucker proposed today, because it's really designed at some of the same issues. Because a number of our sites where we had long lines were from people who were going to a site that was not their election day poll, but was their early voting poll. And then, so in addition to waiting as long as they did to get to the front of the line, they then had to go to the provisional ballot table, which then added extra time for them. So if the committee were inclined to increase the outreach budget, at least to cover the kind of messaging that Margaret just spoke of, where we would be targeting it towards people where going to the wrong polling place led to additional line problems, that would help us to address the line situation.
Okay, and when you say to increase it, has anybody had a conversation about how much that would be? What would be necessary?
not at this time. Again, we are still in the process of going through our lessons learned and Herberto and I have, Dr. Zia and I have talked about this, but at this time, we don't have a really solid response for you.
Ms. Myhill, can you work with the Board of Elections to just get that number? And maybe this could be a very quick item that we come back to then. And I say that because, you know, I understand that particular aspect of the education that has to take place, but if we are in agreement that the next election is going to also be a very interesting one, there's still the ongoing issue of doing that kind of outreach to our immigrant communities, to our minority communities, et cetera, that, you know, that keeps growing. Therefore, we need to do the same thing, I think, proportionately. But obviously, I don't have any information in front of me, so I can't, you know, provide anything, but it's something that I think we need to get, so we can come back just to that item really quickly before it comes to full council. That would be great. Okay, Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I agree with that, but I also would like to see a listing of what $75,000 buys, or whatever that number is. To me, that's a,
Yeah, I think there's a
Hello?
handout. Yeah, it's,
well, that part, but I'm saying in any additional,
oh, okay, yeah, a breakdown,
a
right.
breakdown
Yeah.
of any additional, what the number would be that we're asking
right.
for. Because candidly, if we give $20,000 and you need $50,000, the $20,000 has no meaning. And, I mean, hopefully $20,000 does it, don't get me wrong here, but so I'd like to know exactly what you'd be doing with the money and how we can actually provide the money that's going to be necessary.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, that's exactly what I'm requesting, because I mean, I could come up with a figure right now. It doesn't mean that I know exactly what that's going to buy us.
Right.
So we definitely need that. Okay, any other outstanding item, Ms. Myhill, that we need to decide? Okay, great. So with that.
One
yes.
last comment.
Yes, please.
In regard to Councilman Friedson, talking about preparation and year-round effort, I just want to say that our staff does a fabulous job, day after day, year-round, and they deserve all the credit. It's a tough job. People think we only work 4 days a year.
Exactly.
And they really work all year round. They do a terrific job.
Absolutely.
Perhaps
Thank
in
you so
your
much.
case, you only work the 4 days a year. I'm just saying for you personally, Jim, I'm just saying.
And
Yeah.
final, I
Thank you,
want to
everybody.
thank you and thank Councilman Hucker again for his support.
Thank you so much.
Good seeing you all.
Thank you very much. Okay, so next item is the NDA Public Elections Fund. And I believe that we have some Public Election Fund members today, Mr. Skall, who's the chair, and Paul Schwartz. And whoever else is here for this item can just join us. Okay. All right, Ms. Myhill, are you staffing us for this item? Okay, thank you.
Tom's distracted.
I know, Tom.
It was a
Hucker.
really good point, though.
Distractor. Just kidding. Okay, so welcome for this item, and thank you very much also for all your work on the Public Relations Fund Committee. I think we can say that this was an interesting first run of the public election campaign fund. I participated in it myself. I know a lot of people who did as well, and we had a really robust, I think, process, a hearing to elicit feedback from folks who have participated and those maybe who didn't, and we still have a survey, et cetera. And so these are issues that the committee will definitely take up early fall to see whether we need to introduce amendments to the program, which I anticipate a few of them. But today we're talking about money and budget, so we're going to get right into that. First, let me turn over to Mr. Skall if you have any comments that you'd like to make, and then Ms. Myhill, you can walk us through our decision points.
Committee would like to congratulate the Montgomery County Council for leading.
Is your button on? We want to hear you.
I was gonna say,
Yes.
if you're going to congratulate us, David,
Please.
we want to hear it.
So 3 times.
Only when you're critical do we make sure the
I know, we
button's
mute it.
off.
That's right, the
When
button
you're
goes off.
complimenting us, we make sure everyone can hear it.
I think the county and the whole nation applauds Montgomery County's bold experiment. This really was the nation's first serious experiment in public financing. The other places that have matching programs let candidates raise a lot of additional money. The Montgomery program says you're basically going to depend on the small contributions and the matching. And I think it was a huge success, and it's here to stay. And we would like to make sure that the fund and the program are adequately funded, maybe a little overfunded. That seems to be the safe course, because you really don't want to be dealing with supplementals in the middle of an election. You're sure to be criticized by somebody, and this last round, we recommended 11 million. The council and executive agreed and put that much in. It turned out to be more than was needed. But hey, if everybody had been able to raise sufficient matching, 10.5 million would have been required, and it would have looked very different if there wasn't enough money to meet the promises that the program makes. So this year we've ratcheted back, recommending 1.8 million be added each year for the 3 years, added to the 1.8 that's in the fund, giving a total of 7.2 at the beginning of the next local election year. There must be something in the water at the EOB that makes executives reluctant to put money in this fund. It's fallen to the council to make sure it was adequately funded. We see that the exec did not put anything in. We would urge the council to get ahead of the program. It's never easy. I remember talking to the exec, he was just sure the next year would be easier. For some reason, it never seems to be easier. So we would urge the council to once again take the lead, make sure there's adequate money. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I would be remiss if I didn't specifically thank Mr. Crow for all that you did during the cycle. It was quite the task, and you definitely stepped up, and you did it with a really nice and positive disposition. So I really appreciate all that work, and I know in some ways it was kind of tough because, you know, it was supposed to be the test run and nobody knew, but you did really step up to the plate and really were really wonderful in terms of your assistance to everybody who participated. So thank you so much. With that, Ms. Myhill, tell us what we have in front of us.
Sure. The only decision point for you really is whether or not you want to add funding on the reconciliation list for this program. As you know, the county ultimately spent about $5.2 million in the past cycle. There's currently a balance of $1.8 million. As Mr. Skoll said, the committee to recommend funding for the public election fund majority recommended that you add $1.8 million over the next 3 years. There was a minority that recommended adding $1 million per year for the next 3 years. If the committee is supportive of the majority's recommendation, I listed 3 increments on here of 500,000, 500,000, and 800,000. That's what I would recommend to give you some flexibility on the reconciliation list. I did also note for you in the packet that during this recently finished General Assembly session, there was a bill that was passed that essentially would require counties that exercise their authority to establish public campaign financing to then provide staff and funding. So there's no needed cost increases for this coming fiscal year, but there will be a fiscal impact later on in the election cycle.
How generous, the state. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, thank you very much for all of your work and your service. This is a bleeding edge situation, and not knowing where this was going to go, and there are some wrinkles to work out. We've got some, I think, really good, thoughtful suggestions from a lot of people who either participated in or observed, and look forward to taking that up with colleagues and having their perspectives as well. Just curious, I mean, I know that you said, you know, this is not unique to this particular county executive. The last county executive wasn't enthusiastic about putting this money in his proposed budget. He also wasn't eligible for another election, so I kind of understand not focused on it as much. Were there conversations directly with the county executive? Were there reasons why he suggested not putting money in? I mean, $1.8 million, I strongly support and believe that we need to fully fund this program. I think the question is when, and that's a lot of money on the rec list with a lot of competing priorities. And, I know the county executive supports the program, so just wondering if there were direct conversations with the county executive of why he believed that it was not necessary and timely to do it in this current budget.
In this cycle, Mr. Crow would.
Dave Crow Finance. There were limited discussions on how much to fund in this year, but in previous election cycles, a lot of the funding came in the latter years to see how many people would be participating and what kind of turnout we would have. So I think that's kind of the same approach that the county executive is taking for this one, since we still have 1.8 million currently. But we're going to discuss, I guess, based on the recommendation today.
And presumably the money just sits in the account.
Correct.
So it's 1.8 million in there now. The suggestion is another 1.8 million. And is there any other benefit to funding it in this budget year besides the concern that we will not be fiscally disciplined enough to fully fund it in the year when it is actually needed?
I don't believe so.
I think part of the concern is that you don't know what the future fiscal years are going to look like in terms of resources and such. And so it was challenging for the council to come up with a significant amount of money during the last couple of years of last cycle. But that's certainly a judgment call.
Can I add to this? First of all, it was an honor for me to be part of this program, which I think is going to serve as an example for other municipalities to follow. And of everything that Dave said, the one thing that hits home for me is we really can't afford to underfund this program at any point. That is critical to me. And I anticipate that there's going to be a lot more participation in this program down the line, not less. It was interesting that between Nancy Florine and Mark Elrich, that he's the one who participated in the program, and he won overwhelmingly, which meant to me that the voters also saw a difference between going with somebody who didn't rely on outside money. So this is the way we're going. Citizens United may not have had as much impact on local elections like this as it is on national elections, but it does have an impact. And this is a way of addressing that. And there's nothing, to me, as far as elections go, more important than doing anything we can to get dark money out of politics.
Well, I think I want to be a little bit careful of what this is and what this isn't. Unfortunately, this doesn't change Citizens United or get dark money out of politics. There are still third-party outside groups, unfortunately, because the Supreme Court has been wrong on this issue, in my opinion, and I think widely viewed opinion of many people in Montgomery County. It doesn't solve that problem. It does solve other and address other problems. So I want to be a little bit careful of just clarifying what the program is capable of doing. I think sometimes in our good intentions and good programs, we make the case that we're doing things beyond our control, and the Supreme Court, unfortunately, and Citizens United is one area that we can't control, and one area that this really doesn't address, unfortunately. In that sense, I'm hopeful that we have huge, robust turnout from our previous discussion and can change some of the folks, not just here, but nationally in the Congress and in the White House, so that we can work to address some of those larger issues. I'm not sure that we can completely solve them here, but I think this is one step as a good option for candidates to help make the process accessible. But I think we need to be careful of framing it of what it actually is addressing and what it is not. So thank you.
Yes, Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much. I do support the whole idea of the three different tranches. I think that makes sense. And we'll see how much money we have once we get it off the reconciliation list. I do believe it should be noted that this is a nonpartisan fund. We've had people from both parties and use it, which is the right way to do. And I do think we should be noting that there is the possibility, because we're going through, they used to tease us that we were building the plane as we were flying it for this one, because there was bumps and bruises, things worked, things didn't necessarily always work. that there's a possibility that we would look at whether or not there should be some funding if somebody qualifies during the primary and they do have an opponent during the general, whether or not there should be some immediate funding for that rather than have to start over, though it's a different kind of a start over. I think we need to have those good, open discussions. And if we're going to have additional monies that are necessary, I think we should have the additional funds there so that it doesn't become such a burden on the third and fourth year. So I'm supportive. I don't know whether we can get the entire 1.8 off a reconciliation list. I mean, I don't know how that's going to work, but I do think we should discuss it.
So I am not opposed to putting this in these particular tranches. I think it is going to be a difficult year for a lot of different reasons. But I don't think this was a council that was shy about hitting the mark, and we did, and we hit the target, and we made that a priority, even though it wasn't a particularly great fiscal year. I mean, it's always going to be challenging, but I think that this is a council that realized that this was our priority. This is a very interesting transition year, I think, because we do have a new administration and new council, and half the budget I think was already kind of done. So we're trying to kind of deal with all of that. I don't know that we will be able to fund the entire amount necessarily, but I am not concerned that we wouldn't hit the target that is necessary for this to be another successful, election cycle. I don't know are you objecting to putting the 3 tranches? We'll put it there and we'll see how it goes.
I think we'll figure out what the number looks like, because I think we have to figure out what the competing priority is.
That's what the reconciliation process is about.
And I fully share your view that I don't think there will be any doubt, and I think we should make it very clear, and I'm glad you did, that we will fund it. There's 1.8 million in an account that isn't needed today. I understand the idea of demonstrating commitment to a program, but we also have a ton of needs.
Well, and we have a track record of having demonstrated commitment to the program.
Absolutely. And so I don't think anybody has any doubt of any commitment that this council has, so.
Okay, so we will, with an objection, place those 3 tranches on the reconciliation list and see how it goes. And really do appreciate everybody's commitment and your service to this particular committee. And, I always say that I'm very proud of the fact that this was one of the amendments that I had to the bill, because it really does, I think, make a big difference to have an independent committee be the one to recommend these levels and not us sitting here trying to figure that out and, all of those strange implications. So I think that the committee has done an amazing job at calculating this, and really do appreciate you.
Yeah, that was a major concern, because if you're running for office and you're taking advantage of the program, you would want more money in it. If you're not taking advantage of it, you would want less money in it. So having a group like us did pay dividends, I hope.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you so much. So we're done with this item. Thank you.
All committee members thank the council for the opportunity to participate in this first in the country.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, our 4th item is the Community Engagement Cluster. I believe Ms. Linda Price is the legislative analyst for this item. And if you are here for this particular item, I know we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 persons listed. So as we address issues, we might be calling folks up to the table if there are not enough chairs. We can do that. Welcome. Okay, Ms. Price, tell us what are the highlights of this item.
So the executive, he's recommended a budget of $4.8 million in FY20. It's an increase of 24.6%. The majority of the increase is from the shift of the Business Solutions Group from the County Executive's Office, as well as the shift from the Economic Development NDA for the Regional Businesses Hub. There are a couple, in addition to discussing those 2 points, there are a couple of other items that I would like to bring to the committee's attention. One is just a matter of clarification and addressing correspondence that came in yesterday, and that is related to the Office of Community Partnerships, community liaison positions. Currently, community partnerships, they are recruiting for 3 community liaisons, which include the Asian community, for the Latino community, as well as a senior fellows position for the Middle Eastern community. It was my understanding that the African and Caribbean communities positions were being backfilled by 2 separate contractors. There is a desire for those 2 different advisory groups and liaison positions to be separate so that both communities are represented accordingly. And the correspondence that was received requested $14,560 to have 2 different positions, one contractor filled and the other one actually part-time staff. And then also a point of clarification just related to the racial equity position as well, to just clarify where that position is actually located.
Okay, great. So who would like to address those particular issues as we're starting the conversation? Welcome, Director.
Good afternoon. So we just got the letter, so I will look into it and get back to you. But at first glance, the information that was in the letter is not accurate. And secondly, I spoke to the leadership of both the Caribbean American Advisory Groups and the African Affairs Advisory Groups, and they said that they didn't know anything about the letter. So again, I'm going to look into it and get back to you on that. So to address the specific question about the African and Caribbean liaisons, the decision to have contractors for both communities was made after months of discussions with both the African and Caribbean communities that started during the listening session. So ever since November, we've been discussing this with the communities. So the history here is that our office had one liaison to both the African and Caribbean communities. And in the spring, when the previous liaison left, the decision was made by my predecessor to have 2 contractors fill that role. Because the liaison positions were term positions that ended on December the 31st, and that we needed to fill an immediate short-term need. So for the Caribbean community, a contractor from the advisory group was hired to be the liaison to the community. And for the African community, instead of giving a contract to a contractor, what happened was, because of the expertise of one of our program managers at the Gilchrist Center, a temporary promotion was given to that program manager to fill the role of the liaison temporarily. So what happened was in December, when the county executive decided to preserve the office and the structure of the liaisons, it was our original intent to go back to that one position for both the African and Caribbean communities. But after much discussion with the communities, it was clear that both communities felt as though they needed their own liaisons because they felt like they had more representation, they were better engaged and better informed with county government. And so both the county executive and I agreed that keeping 2 contractors and keeping that structure was the best way to go about doing that.
So this is, I think, I know we're talking about, budget here, but it's also a good opportunity, at least for me, to understand, the new direction with the new administration. Because when we talk about an African liaison, obviously Africa is a continent, right? So it seems odd to me that, we would talk in terms of having a part-time contractor for an entire continent, and when we know that we have a very, very large continental African community here in our county, I think it's time to start thinking about, about the fact that we need to be authentic in how we are actually communicating and engaging with our communities. So that's my first reaction. I don't even understand what it means to have like a part-time contractor to be the liaison to such a large presence in a community in our county. I don't think that sends the correct message. It's the same thing with the Caribbean community. I mean, it's beyond me that we had a Caribbean/African liaison. I don't even know what that means either. But the Caribbean community is also very diverse. I mean, you have French-speaking Caribbean folks, you have English-speaking Caribbean folks. You know, I mean, there's history that is very different. And to be honest, I think these are communities, especially the Caribbean community, and I'm speaking from my vantage point, where I don't see a lot of participation and engagement in local government, and I don't see it reflected in the grants process, et cetera. So this is a really good time to, I think, just take stock of where we are and really bring this whole concept to 2019. If indeed the executive wants to continue with this structure, then we need to make some modifications, right? So who sent this letter? So I don't.
Again, I'm not sure. I will look into it and get back to you. However, like I said, the leadership of the Caribbean American Advisory Group and African Affairs Advisory Group say they don't know anything about the letter.
Okay, so
I did receive this letter to my email yesterday, and it came from a county email address, I apologize, it was not a county email address, but it came from Montgomery County Caribbeans at gmail.com.
Okay.
And I was told to expect the letter, so.
Right, so I guess, so the request in this letter is to.
The request
Yeah.
of the letter is to have one position for the African liaison to be a part-time funded position, and then have the Caribbean liaison to remain a contractor, but have additional resources to work additional hours.
Okay, and then all the other liaisons that you have, so you have a Latino community liaison, you have also the Asian, this seems like.
Yeah. So we have a full-time Latino liaison position that we're recruiting for, a full-time Asian liaison position that we are recruiting for. We have a Middle Eastern liaison position that is a senior fellow position that is only 8 to 10 hours per week. And those are the liaison positions that we are recruiting for right now.
Okay, so can, Ms. Price, do you mind then, can you work with Ms. Price for a couple of scenarios where we can strengthen these areas? And again, I just, I mean, when I joined the council, I used to represent the east, the east part of the county, everything east of New Hampshire Avenue. And, if you spend any time in Burtonsville and Fairland, et cetera, you obviously become very familiar with the very vibrant and very large continental African community there. Again, I don't think I see that represented necessarily in a lot of the things that we do, so there's a disconnect there, right? I spend a lot of time with the so-called Caribbean folks because my husband's from Haiti, and I'm technically also Caribbean because Venezuela is part of the Caribbean world there, and and I also don't see a lot of sort of interaction with local government necessarily, so I think it might be a good moment to see whether we could strengthen that. Those two specific ones, I think, are somewhere we could look at strengthening it in some way. So if you have any ideas that we can entertain and we can bring back, I would definitely like to see if we could put something on the reconciliation list that would give you the opportunity to strengthen those particular liaisons.
Sure, thank you for that. And let me just also make a note that these decisions were made, in negotiations with both communities, considering the resources that we had.
Absolutely.
And another thing that we had to take into effect was that, given fair, equitable distribution of the resources that we currently have, we're also getting approached by the Middle Eastern community to have additional resources. We're also getting approached by the LGBTQ communities as well. And so, like I said, these negotiations.
Well, if you guys can work together and give us a menu of options, because, I'm a big proponent that if we're going to do something, then we need to at least make sure that we're doing it in a comprehensive fashion, right? And the community has grown considerably, I have to say. So, I just don't like to do things halfway, because then you always run the risk of not representing a particular growing segment of the community appropriately. So if we could get some scenarios, I definitely would love to give you some resources so that you can work with that, and because you're doing an amazing job. So I want to make sure that you continue to do that and that you have the resources necessary. Okay, so if you can work with
Thank you
that,
very
that'd be
much.
great.
I'll follow up with Ms. Price.
Awesome. We also received a memo for Councilmember Jawanda regarding the $25,000 for the activity funds that we had recommended for the Regional Services Center. And I know he said that this had been eliminated from the FY20 budget, but perhaps, is there a correction there or no?
Correct. So in FY18, the council did add $25,000 for matching funds for the regional services centers to work with community organizations to put on events. To my knowledge, I do not see a reduction of $25,000 in FY20, and hopefully OMB can confirm that what is actually the case. There was a $25,000 reduction that is recommended for the regional services centers. It's tied to a different pot of money. That money has historically been underused, but the funds that were set aside for the matching funds for community events, to my knowledge, is still currently recommended in the FY20 budget. Getting to Council Member Jawando's point, I do think that it would be helpful to have an accounting of what was done in FY18 and FY19 to match the funds in the community so that we can see that the money that the council did add was actually spent out.
She is correct. There are a lot of programs in there that are remarkably similarly titled, and the 25,000 with the 500 matching per RSC was not touched in the 20 budget. And we'll get back to them on the breakdown.
We can get a summary of, will you work with Ms. Price on that? Awesome, thank you so much. Okay, so, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I had questions about the Regional Business Hub program. If we could speak about that for a minute, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I have a lot, suffice to say, I have a lot of questions on this, some of which is reflecting the fact that I'm a little bit confused as to what is happening. So some of it is just, I'm looking for a little bit of clarity, and some of it is that I'm concerned about certain things that are happening. So I will kind of go through the different questions that I have. So my understanding here first is that the county executive's creating 3 FTEs for about $430,000. In the Regional Business Hub program that's being created, and that money is coming from the incubator program, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we had a long conversation the other day, a very robust discussion, and I appreciate your participation in that. And the conclusion, or the interim conclusion of that conversation, from my understanding, was that the county executive, who has been talking about making massive and significant changes, and his interest in really amplifying the incubator program, was that this is all going to be looked at. There was a serious set of conversations that were going to be happening, a consultant at an undefined cost, at an undefined amount of hours, at an undefined skill set, because you haven't had time, understandably, to determine that would be coming in order to figure out what we do. I raised some concerns about wanting to make sure that the focus is having a successful incubator program, and not what do we do with the 3 physical assets, the 3 properties where the incubator programs are located, and how do we make those more successful. And if that means that we don't use those for the incubator program and they get reallocated somewhere else, or we sell them, or we rent them out for some other, or use them for some other use, I'd be okay with that. It was somewhat misinterpreted in a rather salacious headline in terms of what I said in that article, so I just want to be clear about that, but I was specifically referring to this, and I thought we had a really good discussion. So the question related to the $430,000, just under $430,000 for this, is what does that mean for the incubator program? And how do we know that we can spend this money out of the NDA for the incubator program if we don't know what we're doing yet with the incubator program, when we have an indeterminate amount of money that is being spent on an indeterminate person or people or consultancy that's going to help us with an indeterminate program that we don't know how much it's going to cost and what it's going to require?
Jerome can talk about the small business or strategy that he's working on, but this is just the beginning. And if your question is regarding even the incubator program, we are going to come back with a very broad strategy. So that's part of the strategy, Jerome.
And good afternoon, council members, Madam Chair. I believe your question goes back to how much funding will be remaining after this transaction here in the incubator program itself. Will there be enough money that will allow us to fund the consultant's contract that we discussed earlier regarding how we see us moving forward for the incubator program? Is that?
Part of the question, but yeah, you can answer that one first. That would be great.
Corey might be able to tell us at this point in time, I'm not sure if he can, the actual balance of the incubator program once the 429 is addressed. Is that?
Not right now, I cannot.
Okay, so
But
that-
we can take that up in conjunction.
Yeah, it's hard to know whether this is an appropriate, if we don't know what is left. It's also hard to know how you even know how much money is needed to stay in the incubator program where you're still coming back, understandably, like I said, to the council with your plan, which of course doesn't yet have a price tag on it because we don't know what the plan is. And I don't know that you've had time to develop that plan yet, right?
Correct. The scope of work for the plan is still being developed at this point. And once we do get it developed, it will go out for bid, and then that will bring back a price. And then that price, we will have to determine whether or not we have the funding available or whether or not we need to locate funding for the actual study to commence.
Okay, well, I have real concerns about shifting money away from a program that we don't know how much that program is going to need, that is supposed to be, and we've been told, is a major emphasis and focus for the county executive, and we don't know what the result would be. I just have some real concerns about that. The NDA, is this general fund funded NDA?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so the money could be moved. Okay. And then what is the 430,000, the current 3 FTEs that are in the incubator program? What are they doing today? Are those vacancies?
This would be a creation of 3 new positions. The funding is not tied to a specific program or individual in the incubator NDA currently, but it's funding that exists in the 19 budget that we would be transitioning to the CEC budget to fill this function. Part of that function would be the creation of 3 FTEs.
So I'm just curious because we are massively subsidizing the incubator program through the fact that we have buildings that aren't fully leased out. From my understanding, there's 3 buildings, and the 3 of them, I don't have it in front of me from the previous briefing, but they're basically half full, each of them. And so we are, with taxpayer dollars, effectively subsidizing that program, and that's part of the reason I think the term that was used was lame. We have a lame incubator program, which is the impetus behind the county executive's focus on this. That wasn't my word, that was the word of finance that was used at that hearing, that we have a lame incubator program, we're trying to fix it. But I'm confused how we can have $430,000 to be able to create new positions and move them to another area of emphasis outside of the incubator program when we're already subsidizing the incubator program. The incubator program isn't making money, it's losing money. So can you connect those dots for me? Because it doesn't make any sense to me.
I fear the best we could do right now would be have half a conversation. So I would encourage, if we were to go down that road, it would be something with folks more qualified on the incubator NDA to speak to that.
Okay, well, I'm like I said, without having that conversation, I don't know that I'd be comfortable with it, but let me focus then on some things that maybe we can answer here, specifically related to what the goal of this would be, whether or not it's a good transfer of money from one area of the budget to another is a question for another day that, like I said, I have concerns about. But who would this team report to, the way that it's currently set up?
The way that it's currently set up, these 3 new people, or if you're still referring back to these 3 new people, we currently have it set up so where the infusion of resources to the community are going to be twofold. We're talking about the current staff that we have, which is the Business Solutions Group as you know it, as well as these 3 new individuals. We currently are leaning towards the 2 individuals that are undefined business development specialists. They would be providing admin and back-of-the-house support to the regional service centers that are in desperate need of that right now. So those individuals will be reporting to the regional service directors.
So how would that relate to Judy Stevenson, her role? They wouldn't report to Judy Stevenson, they'd report to the regional service center director?
Now, Judy Stevenson is part of the other side, which is the existing staff. That staff is being just relocated from the county executive's office into the field, so to speak. So they still remain and retain a reporting relationship to the county executive's office.
Okay, so Judy, who has a very good reputation, works well with it. The idea is she's on the second floor in an office, and you want her out on the street. Where's her office going to be?
Her home base will be Up County.
The Up County Regional Services Center. Okay. And is there a particular rhyme or reason to that being the place that she's put? Is there need for business outreach there? Is this a focus of the county exec? What thought was put into that being her office versus, say,
Twofold.
Silver Spring or Bethesda, Chevy Chase Regional?
Twofold. One, the pilot for the hub program is being launched there in the Up County Regional Center, as well as it's in close proximity for her to get to at a quicker basis from her home.
Okay, and she will continue to report to the county executive, but the additional 3 positions, I didn't catch that. They're reporting to her, they're reporting to the Regional Service Center,
So currently, she reports to the
CAO.
Correct, and she will still continue that reporting relationship.
The overall small business strategy is actually being led by Office of the County Executive. Jerome is going to handle that. So from that perspective, she, along with the remaining, will have a connection or a communication along with the strategy Jerome is trying to implement. As far as the day-to-day, just because they're in that physical space, on a day-to-day needs, they're going to have a directly reporting to the RSC directors. But as far as their functional, because they're working on a variety of projects, either focused on small business or in the future possibly incubator programs, in that they're going to be working with Jerome.
And is there any reason, I mean, Bethesda, Chevy Chase, that service area has the most number of businesses, the most amount of construction and development and all those things. There's no plan for somebody there now. Was that intentional?
No, it's not intentional. So this is the beginning. This is just a phase 1. Ideally, we're going to have actually bodies in each of those centers. But for now, even these current staff are going to be rotating and providing services as needed.
All of the areas. All the areas will get service. There will not be service just in Up County because Judy is there. She will be able to service and partner and communicate with the other directors to provide them more hands-on service than they're getting right now. Right now, Judy is providing service globally, but she's doing it from the second floor of our building. She will still be providing services globally, but having more ability to have interaction and day-to-day contact with the public when she's out in the field.
And I'm still a little confused. Are the 3 people reporting to her, or are they reporting to you, or are they reporting to the Regional Services Center Director?
The 3 new people?
3 new people that are being created.
While we are still working through those details, we believe that those people will be servicing the Regional Service Center directors directly on a regular basis, and that's where the reporting relationship should lie.
Have the Regional Service Center Directors been part of these conversations of how this is going to fundamentally change what the expectations are for their jobs?
They have.
And just one last question. So for the next, and I can wait for the next one, but how would these folks relate to the business, the regional business hub part of this proposal? Like how do these folks interact with the other folks that we're going to be talking about?
The 3 new people?
How do the 3 new people relate to the regional hub program as part of the business liaison officer that's part of this proposal?
So the regional hub, or the resource hub, actually is going to be led by the current staff of Judy, Daniel, and another full-time employee. What the other new staff that you're referring to will support will be, they will be able to support the back of the house, the administrative piece of it that is currently in need from the directors in their current centers. So they are not actually going to provide training or leading a program within the resource hub, but they will be providing support. What we've learned is that over the course of time, as programs evolve, the staffing has been reduced from the centers. We're trying to add it back so that they can be better supported. And Judy and the team being out in the field should relieve some of the pressure of the small business component of their role while being a better partner. And these new resources will also be an ability to relieve pressure from them from taking away things that they don't have to worry about on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. I have some specific questions also on the business liaison office, but I'll wait if others have
Yeah, I have some questions.
questions. Yeah. Thank you.
So-
Sorry.
No problem. No, this is a good conversation. Okay, so let me see if I can understand. So on page 5, so number 1 is the Regional Business Hub Program, right? And that's 429,583, 3 FTEs. It says here that the purpose of the Regional Business Service Hub Program is to interact and reach out to local businesses and entrepreneurs for assistance needed to grow and expand jobs, right? And so that particular program, and I see here that there's a specialist 3, and then a business liaison officer. So those 3 positions, those are the ones that you were saying that are going to be in a couple of regional services centers and housed in 3 regional services centers?
Everybody's going to be in the regional service centers.
There are 3 of them, so
There
those
are-
3 are gonna be in the regional services centers?
Overall, there are if you see 5 positions. 2
Okay, on
are
page
in-
5, I'm looking at a chart that has 3 positions.
Yes.
Business Development Specialist 3, Business Development Specialist 3, Business Liaison Officer, so I'm focusing on those 3 for now.
So those 3, the first 2 are vacant, and the third one is currently is not. This is the position that we had a RIF employee who's going to fill that position.
Great, so tell me what those 3 are gonna do.
So the RIF one is going to be basically focused on a small business, as what you heard from Jerome will be doing. So these 2 positions, which are going to be possibly filled later on in the year, is that right? Because of the funding. One, most likely, is going to be the back office person to provide administrative support to all the units in all these 5 RSCs.
So one of the specialist 3 will provide administrative support to all the regional
Yes.
services centers.
The second one will be another, what we call a small business liaison somewhere. We haven't even decided where or I guess when. The timing was, I wasn't sure, was it going to be mid-year or towards end of the year? But yes, the second one is going to be a small business liaison or support, similar to the other.
And that position, the small business liaison, would provide support to all the regional services centers
Yes,
as well?
yes, as well. Ideally, we want to have one in each center physically.
So is that the plan?
Yes, that's the plan. So this is what we said, this is our first
This is the start.
phase. This is the start, this is our first phase. That is the plan.
Okay, and then the business liaison officer, which is grade 28,
Yes.
then that person then would do, again,
Small business outreach.
Small bit.
for all the regional services centers, along with the specialist 3, that's grade 23?
Yes.
Okay. So then, and so what you're saying is that this is the beginning, so you plan to phase that out so that every single regional services center has a person?
Yes.
Okay, now, what about the other functions of the regional services center vis-à-vis service delivery to their particular areas, right? Are there any plans other than business focus to strengthen the regional services centers in a similar fashion, right? So here, what you're doing is you have 3, they're gonna be basically rotating. Were there any plans for then strengthening service delivery in other areas, human, HHS or things like that?
Ideally, if we have resources, but we are hoping, well, HHS, you're talking about other agencies having a presence there. But ideally, we are if you have resources, yes, to strengthen the other aspect of their jobs also. But ideally, if we do this right, it could even relieve or create some additional capacity in RSCs as well, because currently they are involved with the small business matters. And even the collaboration with these new positions, we believe we can actually maximize the use of resources. But to go back to answer your question, yes, we would, depending on availability of funding, yes, it is a desire to strengthen, and I've heard the county executive repeatedly saying he wants to strengthen the RSC centers.
Well, it's also, I think, an interest that we have here on the council, because in the spirit of restructuring, I think the fact that you're going to spread these folks, it's a good way to leverage that. Obviously, it will require very careful job descriptions, or I guess, make sure that the regional services directors even know how they're going to be interacting with these folks, because every area of the county is different, right? And they're going to have different needs. And I know that the executive has said that this will also help sort of that community economic development issue that we have all struggled with. So I think that will be a positive. But I think also it's important to think through how would things like, social services or job, fairs and things like that, workforce development, et cetera. We have a great model in the East County, but I also always worry that we tend to get really excited and then we'll propose, like the East County Opportunity Zone type thing and put all these resources, and then we forget that we have areas in the Mid-County or in the Up-County that need that kind of support, and then we create other inequities, right? So I'm just trying to understand in terms of your plan, how this new plan is going to address, those issues that I know we have been suffering for a while in terms of finding that kind of balance, right? So any other thoughts on that other than just the business piece?
Well, as far as, as I said, if resources are available, we would like to strengthen.
Well, it's also restructuring, right? So it's not just about money, but it's also about whether there have been any thought to restructure other, because this technically is a restructuring, no?
Yes.
Technically is coming from the incubators that we all have agreed were not working very well, so they're gonna kind of migrate those and then have another, proposal, I suppose, regarding the incubator program. So it's not necessarily more resources, it's kind of like, are you shifting things around?
Yes, and I have heard again from county executive, some other sort of restructuring. At this point, I cannot maybe clearly explain what that is, but I hear you, Ms. Navarro.
We're waiting.
Yes.
We're happy to wait for those type of briefings coming up soon. Thank you. Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. All right, so what I don't understand, first of all, I have no problem with money, the budget itself, which is, I think literally getting into the weeds on this one is going to be very difficult. But if we don't have the money set aside, we're not going to be able to even look at the weeds. So I think we need to have the money set aside. But what I don't understand is on page 5, Linda, that we're talking about the grade 28 is $266,063, and a grade 28, according to air schedule, is $123,799. So how does that work?
To answer that question, I will first say that the position that is identified to occupy that grade 28 position, as I mentioned earlier, was RIFT. It's coming over from procurement. It's one of the vacant or the occupied positions that had been identified to be abolished in relation to Bill 319. I will correct myself in the packet. I state that creating this position, while it is a new position, it's using existing funding, so there are savings that will be achieved in relation to that fiscal impact that we discussed related to Bill 319. But yes, this position was currently it's an M1 in procurement, and it being transferred over to the regional business hub as a grade 28. There is a very large difference in the salary.
Huge.
So
Yeah, the total personnel cost of grade 28 actually is 160 plus benefits, you're correct. And per county's RIF laws, the person keeps his or her salary for 2 years. After 2 years, it will revert to the top of the grade that they are in. So this individual is going to keep his salary for 2 years, but after 2 years, his salary is going to be reverted to the top of grade 28.
So for 2 or 3 years, whatever the number, 2 years, a person would be receiving the 266, is that what you're saying?
No, this is not the salary, that's the total package, benefit.
That's the total package.
Salary is somewhere around, I believe, 180.
But,
180.
well, I think we need a correct number on that, if that's the case. I mean,
Yes.
To break out the salary and the personnel.
Yeah.
yeah.
Because
Because we're
overall-
talking about a person, we're not talking about personnel in general. We're talking about a person. Yeah. Thanks.
Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I just want to, that was, some of my questions have been asked, and that explains part of the discrepancy, which is that you are basically reclassing an M1 into a grade 28, right? And so the staff, I just want to make sure I'm clear of what has happened. Staff had it still at the M1 because that's what the position is, and you're saying that this position, I guess after 2 years, is going to revert down?
It's not, class is not, we're not reclassing, RIF
So-
process is,
So why does staff think that it's 266?
the salary.
That is correct. The current salary and benefits for the M1 that is being abolished in procurement is $266,000.
And that is an incumbent who's currently in the position?
Correct.
Okay, so that's my problem. We were told when we made the changes that we made, that we agreed, we offered, I think, significant amount of deference to the county executive, that these were positions that were being eliminated, and those positions had cost savings. Now, for the second time today, we're learning that these positions aren't being eliminated. And there isn't a cost savings, and if there is a cost saving, it's a long-term cost savings because they're going to be reclassed to a lower level position.
I would like to correct what is in the packet. This particular position would indeed generate a cost savings because these funds are existing already. We're shifting funds in FY19 from this economic development NDA into this community engagement cluster. So we're not, I mean, we are saving the funds that we're cutting out of procurement, and we're shifting funds from the NDA over to this position. So there is a net change, there is a reduction.
I would have a strong disagreement with the way that's being characterized. This is a left pocket versus right pocket. It's taxpayer money that is from the general fund to go into an NDA versus taxpayer money from the general fund from a different account. This is an accounting trick, and that isn't real savings. Unless I'm not understanding what's
I hear
happening.
you, I clearly understand what you're saying. I think what you're saying is this high-paying position who is going to receive this salary for 2 years, and we have this grade 28, which actually, there's a $100,000 difference. You're absolutely right. Although the source of funds are either NDA or I agree with you, you're correct. So there is a $100,000 difference, you are correct. For 2 years, and county's RIF law, and this person, everybody has a RIF law. The person could have decided to retire or request to be actually placed in another position. And this is drastically lower than his actual grade. So I clearly understand what you're saying. So there's a $100,000 difference between these two positions.
So that's part of the issue. What was this position? Was this position when we approved the first of what sounds like are going to be several piecemeal different restructurings, which I'm not sure is the best way to go about this because it makes it very confusing of what the overall restructuring vision is going to be. But when we were told, you were here, and you worked very hard getting us answers to a lot of questions, which I truly and genuinely appreciate. But was this a position that was expected to be eliminated as part of the $750,000 in cost savings?
$775,927, yes. And we owe you, we are gonna come back to you by
Okay, so
July.
does that mean it's 100,000 less, or it's $266,000?
No, it's $100,000 less.
Because this was expected to be reclassed?
It is the full 266. Another way to look at it
Yeah.
is that in 19, there's 466 or 430,000 in the NDA and the 266,000 in procurement. In FY20, what we're saying is that the 430,000 in the NDA moves from the NDA to the CEC budget. When you take up the procurement budget, you'll see that the 266 is completely off of that picture. What the 430 does from the NDA to the CEC is the creation of 3 positions. One of those positions and the funding to associate with that will be filled by this personnel transaction that happens to be from the position that is being abolished. So it is a true subtraction of the full 266 from the overall general fund budget.
It's a
NDA is part of the
subtraction.
general fund, so is the procurement. in that.
So I think you're saying different things. I think it's the 266 being subtracted is from what we were told was the savings from the county executive's restructuring. The $775,000 that we were told that was the predicate for the restructuring changes of the senior level management, that there was a really good headline in the paper and a lot of public statements were made, and we based our decision based off of that information. We have now piecemeal in two different instances, this one being the most egregious of them, that these positions aren't being eliminated like we were told they were being eliminated. And just because they come from an NDA versus coming from the Office of Procurement doesn't change the fact that they're coming out of the pockets of taxpayers. And they're cutting out from what would be a potential opportunity to provide services or to fund a different priority. And as we didn't fully fund schools, we didn't fully fund the community college. I know the council president and this council are working really hard to work with the county executive to figure it out, but it's disingenuous to have told the public, and frankly to have told us, that there was going to be $775,000 of cost savings by the votes that we had taken for the positions that we were told were being eliminated as part of that restructuring, when in fact, it doesn't look like some of those positions, if not more of those positions, are being eliminated, at least for 2 years.
Position being all those positions will be eliminated as of June 30th.
How does that relate to the new position, the new position here that is?
These employees have a RIF right, reduction in force rights, so they can choose to be interviewed for other positions and get into, continue their services. And then per our personnel reg, they have the right to keep their salary for 2 years, and after that, it's going to be reverted back to their, so employees have rights.
So are we creating this program to put a person who has RIF rights into it, or are we creating the program and they happen to
There are
have
many
applied
vacant
for it?
positions. This person's skill set actually fits this need here. This person is actually working in a small business and in similar cases.
I still think then to have told the public that these were going to be cost savings when they're clearly not, and to have told us and we made decisions based off of those cost savings, I still believe was disingenuous, and I don't believe those cost savings are real, and I have some real concerns with that, and for those reasons and the fact that I don't think this plan is fully baked out, and we don't have any idea what the incubator program is going to look like, which is largely funding this entire plan here, if we're even far enough along the line to consider it a plan. I don't support I don't support these new positions, and I don't support using the NDA from the incubator program to fund it until we have a formal plan for what the incubator program is going to look like and how much it's going to cost.
Vice President Katz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I think we would need to simplify this, is what we're going through. I think it would be very, very helpful if you would show us on a side-by-side basis what your new program is suggesting, and next to it, how much we are actually changing and when it would change. Because you're, in one breath, we're saying that there is going to be a reduction, but it's going to take 2 years to really maximize that reduction. And I think it would be helpful for us to have a chart that shows what it's going to cost us, what we're saving, and when we'd save it. Do you have anything like that now, you're saying?
We already sent it under Bill 3-19. You had that.
I don't have it in front of me.
I promised Mr. Friedson to, at the end of the year, when the positions are abolished, to send him the final account of the savings.
You have that chart with you now, you're saying?
I do have the chart with me.
Well, if you could, I think we need something that simplistic, please.
Okay, so we're going to have to come back to this item. So I think what we need is a chart that specifically spells out the decision that we made with the bill. I just want to note that when we adopted the bill, we were very clear that we were abolishing, that we were not in the business of abolishing positions, because that's what's going to happen. That was going to happen through budget, which is what we're doing right now. So even though, our staff told us you have to kind of separate those two things, we did ask about what was the fiscal impact, and we were told that there would be this particular level of savings. So it is relevant to understand, now that we're going through budget, what does that mean? I will personally state for the record that I do not intend to micromanage how the executive wants to establish his administration and how he intends to roll out some of these priorities. If I wanted to do that, then I would have run for executive myself. So in that respect, I disagree with you a little bit that I don't want to do that. But what I do want to understand is exactly, if we were told that there was going to be a particular level of savings, how is it that we are achieving this? And then it would be very important for us to for me at least, to understand what are going to be the job descriptions, who's gonna report to whom, and what are the stated outcomes. I mean, at the end of the day, this is about outcomes. So what are those stated outcomes? I would want to hear from the regional services directors, how do they, what is their interpretation of how this is going to be managed, and what do they intend to do with it, just to have a sense of how this model is going to, be implemented. So that would be, I think, just important because it is new in that respect. But how to, I guess, reconcile that figure that we were told that would be in cost savings with what we're doing now, it is important to have a chart that kind of delineates that. So we'll come back to this item. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Okay, moving on to item number 5, which is our Public Information Office. Moving right along.
Speed of light.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No.
Actually, Costas is going to come with, we're going to do it together, 5 and 6.
Okay, great. So for item 5, I see that here we have expected to attend Ohaney Giampong from Director of the Office of Public Information, Leslie Ham, Office of Public Information, and Jamie Kira
OMB.
from OMB. And so,
Are they doing 5
how are
and
you?
6 together? What is?
The reason we're doing 5 and 6 are actually one budget. We just traditionally separate it because quite honestly, the services are not exactly related. I mean, they sort of are, and it's just easier if you have us both here at the same time because the questions, I don't know.
Okay, but I'd
Because
like
it's
to
one
just
budget.
go through the packet. That
We can do that, yes.
specified. So item 5, which
Which is
is
the
the Office
PIO.
of Public Information. So if we could do that one, that would be great.
So this is the same service budget. There are no additions. The only additions are for salary changes and retirement changes. So there are no issues. And this aspect of the PIO budget and the, what do you call it, public relations, web management, there are no issues in that part of the budget. And I can't pronounce your last name, so Ohaney is here, and if he.
Good
Haney,
afternoon,
yes.
council members and committee chairperson, Madam President. Ohaney Japong. Sounds like Japan and ping pong.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Hammond. I'm the director of MC 311.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Torrego, is there anything that we should be looking at with this particular item?
Not on item 5, no.
Okay, any questions from my colleagues?
Nope.
All right, this is a very quick item, Mr. Haney. So with that objection, we will approve this particular budget.
Wait, for item 6.
Yep, we're
3 and
now,
1.
we're not going to move on to item 6. Yep.
Thank you.
You're starting to get up, so.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so item number 6, Dr. Torregas.
Thank you. So item number 6 specifically focuses on one part of the PIO budget, which is called MC 311. I'll remind you that about 10 years ago, we consolidated call centers from a variety of departments, had a cost saving of about $7 million of labor costs, and organized a single call center, which Ms. Ham runs as the call center director. You have in front of you my recommendations to follow the track of my friend. It is a flat budget. There's no increases requested. It's just a minor change, 0.8% change. But I've focused on 2 things on page 1 of my memo. One is Is it time to rethink the technology component? And there's some timing issues there that perhaps you might want to discuss. And the second is utilization and staffing. There are some uneven trends that are visible. Our Office of Legislative Oversight provides you a monthly report, and that monthly report has some very disturbing numbers in the last few months. So you may want to focus on, do we have enough people? Are they doing the right job in that center? So those are the two primary areas that I would urge you to focus on. I can continue, but perhaps you have some questions, or
Can you
perhaps.
just, I'm sorry, can you highlight a little bit more about when you said there are some disturbing?
Right, so if you turn to Circle 7, it summarizes operational data from MC311 from February 17th, 2019 to March 16th, which is the most recent 4-week period. And towards the bottom, you'll see that the center received about 35,000 calls, which annualizes to almost $500,000, $450,000 or so $1,000. But the next two columns over shows the abandoned call rate with a target of 5% is currently riding 11.2%. And I'm sure that's an item of some concern. Your committee reviewed this about 4 months ago and had some concerns about it. So that hasn't changed. And going over to the other column, you see that the average seconds to answer, and the target there is 20 seconds, is currently riding at 115 seconds. So those two numbers tell me something. They tell me that either we don't have enough staff, or the staff that we have aren't doing the right work at the right time with the right technology.
And wasn't this the committee that also added some staff to MC3?
You did indeed.
You did indeed. Okay. All right, so could you please address those issues, and then we'll get into questions from my colleagues.
So I'm going to give this over to Steve here in a minute. But you're right, the abandoned call rate has been very, very high. And just for your edification, the abandoned call rate is when a customer calls us, they get on the switch, and then they get transferred to a live person at 311. So the customer, before that happens, could say, oh, I don't feel like waiting anymore, so they could just hang up. So that sometimes happens when we have a very, very high call volume, and that makes a big difference, because we don't necessarily have enough people to cover all of that when those things, type of things happen.
So the staff, the additional staff that the committee added, so that didn't make a difference at all? Because you're saying you don't have enough people, so.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, or Catherine can talk a little bit about it? She's all the way down at the end there.
Because I just want to, remind just for the record, that these were not additional staff that you had requested. This was the committee being very concerned about some of the data points that actually added the staff. And so it is a bit concerning that, we rely on you to tell us how things are going. We take the initiative to add staff because we keep tracking the data, and then here we are, and it seems like things have not improved significantly, and you're still saying that you don't have enough. So
Madam Chairperson, I agree with your concern. As acting director, I agree with your concern, and I have to own that. It's a process that we're looking at in terms of reporting, being proactive in our reporting into our challenges. So that's one area we're addressing. The complexity of the calls has grown, while our staff has not grown proportionately to meet that, and that will lead to a higher abandoned call rate. We're looking at processes, we're looking at technologies that can help with that. We are trying to alleviate some of the workload via social media and other channels, but we do need to do a better job of proactively reporting to the council what our needs and shortcomings are. This is a challenge that doesn't look to improve in the near future, but we are working to improve it, both the communication and the operational side of it.
Part of, and I feel like sort of, we're like starting conversations anew. Obviously, one of the biggest concerns that this committee has had for quite a long time is that we have set up certain expectations out in the public. And one of the things that we do every time we go out there into the public, which is very often, it's always refer our constituents to 311. Now, inevitably, what happens is that, what we tell them is, call 311. If for some reason it's not resolved, you can call our office. And so we are also managing a lot of 311 issues, right? So this committee has been very proactive and patient in supporting the launch of 311, some of the glitches at the very beginning, the issues around storm surge, the fact that then you were using contractors, and the contractors had no familiarity with Montgomery County because they were in New York. And this is why the committee decided to then add money for specific positions, because at the end of the day, what is the total budget for 311 again, Dr. Torrega?
It's $3.8 million.
Right, so if we're gonna invest this amount of money and we're gonna set this expectation in the public, then it has to work. The other issue we were always tracking was the fact that we look at the percentages of our population, and for example, the Spanish language calls, it just made no sense when you looked at the percentage of Spanish-speaking members of our community and the number of calls. And so that was another thing that we looked at, which, again, just didn't make any sense. So I think that, we're in a new administration, we're gonna, start it again. I don't think it's acceptable to, to be saying that we're spending this money, that we're touting this system, that it's all over the place, but then we are constantly having these issues, and you're telling me that this is not gonna get better anytime soon. So I begs the question, why do we even invest in this? Why do we even have this system? I mean, we should just call it a day and say, you know what, we don't need to have this expenditure, and then find some other way. I don't know, social media, Twitter. I mean, there are all kinds of, platforms these days, that maybe that's what we should do instead of doing this. Because, I mean, for a while, I understood and I was sensitive to it, and because we were launching it, and, Chicago had launched one, and we were watching what they were doing, and so, okay, we understand phase 1, phase 2, et cetera. I'm sorry, I don't think this is acceptable. And there isn't even like some kind of a proposal to figure out how to address it?
Madam Chairperson, I don't disagree with you in terms of what's acceptable and what's not. There's no daylight between us on that. I cannot speak for the actions that happened in the past. I can tell you that we are looking at it. We have been looking at it. We are looking at it, and we will do a better job. As far as 311 itself, it's much like the UN. If you didn't have it, you'd have to invent it. It's a system that receives thousands of calls per month. It is being used. We are doing intakes via social media. We are doing intakes via phone. Some of the overlap does fall to the Public Information Office or the county executive, or unfortunately the county council as well. When I say it's not going to get better in the near term, that's just a management expectation, because we are working toward improving it. I cannot give you a realistic timeline. I would love to be able to tell you that within the next quarter, our abandon rate would drop 50%. I would love to be able to tell you that. I cannot realistically tell you that, and I'd rather not start off this relationship by lying to you.
I would never ask you to lie to us, particularly, on the record. That is not the way that we conduct our business. But what we do expect is for whoever is in charge of a particular area, especially if there's already a particularly documented track record of the challenges that have existed, is that if you're going to come before us in order to have us approve the budget, that you should at least have had a little bit of time to research and see what kind of possible remedies you can put in place given the history. This is like a broken record. That's the problem. And I'm an elected official, and I can tell you that our taxpayers and residents, I cannot even imagine what they must be thinking. So this is not acceptable. To me, it's not acceptable at all. And to not hear any possible solution, and for this committee to have had to take the initiative to literally put money to add positions because the 311 team wouldn't even offer that as a possible suggestion, it's problematic.
Madam President, I would just offer that you've got a new DJ, although an interim one. a new DJ, and I would like to stop the broken record, and we are working toward that. We are working with DTS to research a possible things that would alleviate the stress, alleviate the strain, both on the clients and the CSRs. We're still in the research phase for that. Again, we have to own not communicating that sooner, but we are in the research phase for that, and we are working toward making this better.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Well, first of all, thank you, Madam Chair, for your frustration and exasperation. I can imagine what you are going through because I've only been here for a few months, and I am really frustrated as well. And that doesn't even speak to the work that has been done before and the fact that I haven't sat through and been on this side of the table through previous iterations of this exact same conversation. And so I echo everything that you've said, respecting and understanding the fact that it's not nearly as bad for me because I haven't had to sit through this same thing, but my constituents have. Just like everybody else's constituents have, and it isn't acceptable. And I don't think there's really anything more important than what we do and what we're talking about through this budget process than this. This is literally the front door to local government. This is what most of our residents are interfacing with county government. And the first taste of county government they're getting is sour. It is really lousy. And, just like a restaurant, you get one chance, and if you deliver something that stinks, you're going to go out of business and you're going to lose that customer. That's what we're doing here. And it's turning people off to county government. It's making them not understand all the other work that we're doing because they don't think that we care because we don't have a system that interfaces with them and that communicates with them that meets their expectations and that meets our expectations. So as we tell every constituent that we really truly believe in the quality of life issues, the day-to-day issues, that we are working our tails off to make sure that government works and it functions at a level that they would expect. When we ask them to have tax increases to fund important county services, and then when they pick up the phone and try to get an answer, they don't get it, that message has much more significant consequences than just one single abandoned call. To the points that were made before, the February number that I have is 115.1 seconds with a target rate of 20 seconds. The January to February is 52 with a goal of 20 seconds. The average seconds for a call, 80 seconds, over 80 seconds in December, over 134 seconds in November, 91 seconds in October, and almost 107 seconds in September. So it's not just what we're missing by a lot, and we're missing consistently. And the idea that there are no tangible plans and that while I appreciate your candor by saying that you don't see it getting better anytime soon, I think that Council President is right, that it doesn't really instill a lot of confidence in us and more importantly in taxpayers to be putting good money after what is clearly bad and a system that clearly doesn't work. I have been in situations and been part of organizations that had large-scale call centers, the 529 program that we have, 300,000 account holders, the comptroller's office, 2.2 million taxpayers. One of the challenges that I have with the way that our 311 system sets up is it doesn't even make sense for me that it is even in the PIO office. You're a public relations officer, and I have great respect for you because I also ran a communications office for a large government agency in a previous life as part of my role. And I have not seen in the places that I have been the 311 system, which is a customer service operations function. It is largely technology and its personnel and its operations. It usually falls under the COO at a private company like a financial institution or a cable company, or in the case of government, a more operational type of role, because it is at the core of the operations of county government. It is at the core of the operations of a customer-facing business. So I would suggest, it doesn't sound like there is a whole lot of plan for how to get better, that there be real serious conversations within the executive branch of whether or not this is even the appropriate place for this to be housed and whether or not we are set up currently to handle this program. That's not your fault. frankly. I think that is a problem of management, and that is not a criticism, frankly, of the current county executive. This was put in place by the previous administration, and so this isn't a targeted criticism to any individual person or even anybody in the room. My view is when you're in a leadership position, if you put somebody in a position to succeed and they fail, that's on them. If you put them in a position to fail and they fail, it's on you. And as county government, I think we have a system that is set up to fail, and it is failing, and it is failing miserably, and taxpayers are paying the price for it. And I think that we really need to, have serious thoughts on this and figure out where this should be and how it should be, and have a fundamental conversation about how we're going to move forward, because we are in a ditch. And it seems like we are digging that ditch even deeper, and we're doing it with precious taxpayer dollars at the expense of the trust that taxpayers have that their county government is providing the services that they desperately need. And I just have real concerns. I share all the concerns that Council President Navarro has raised, and I think this is a broader question than just what is the technology platform. I think it's a management problem. I think it's a structural problem, and I think that we ought to really take a step back and think about whether or not we should continue down this road, because I can tell you my constituents, they don't call 311 for the most part. They try it once or twice and they call my office. And my staff pays the price for that. And they're the ones who are handling the casework. And so I understand that there are some cost savings for streamlining this, but there are costs elsewhere in the delivery of constituent services that are happening, where we are dealing with sidewalk issues and street lights out and all of the day-to-day quality of life issues that I am focused on, because I think that they're the lifeblood of local government. 311 isn't doing the job, and we've got to figure this out.
I'm going to move on to Council Member Katz. I don't want to do a time check, so we need to wrap up by 5 o'clock. I think, Dr. Duenas, you also have included some very useful suggestions that I would like for us to, quickly address, including the issue of management and where maybe it should reside, given the work around the Chief Digital Officer position that we created and things of that nature. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you, and I will be quick. I agree with much of what's been said. I think, candidly, I never exactly understood why this was under the Public Information Office to start with, candidly. I mean, it was there, and therefore it stayed there, and so the inertia wasn't something that I thought ever made any sense. So I think we need to look at it for restructuring. I also believe, though, while we're looking at it to restructure it, we have to figure out a better way to do what our public deserves, and that is to service. We're in the service business, and we're not doing that. So while we're restructuring or figuring out what's the next best step, we need to figure out what's the best way we can do it starting tomorrow morning. I mean, we have got to do a better job. And candidly, the fact that we've had the 11% or whatever the numbers are for the abandoned rate, some of that is somebody who's frustrated and hangs up and figures, well, I'm just going to call back. And so you're getting a little bit of that. You're getting people that never call back ever again. And, it's the old story, for unemployment rate, if somebody's not looking for a job, they stop looking for a job, they're not considered unemployed. They're unemployed, but they're not in those statistics. That's not fair either. So we've got to figure out, and I think we need to have a good discussion, as I say, starting tomorrow morning on how we're going to do a better job. Having said that, how fast can we start to correct the structure of it in its entirety?
So, Dr. Reyes, can you go over those two items, the recommendation items that you have on the first page, so we can react to those?
Very quickly. The first one has to do with the efforts that the PIO office has made and continues to make to upgrade the technology. In years past, I noticed that there were no significant dollars being spent on the technology we have, and it's aging technology. It's about 10 years old. It's for the first time, I see in the budget and the discussion that appears further down the pages, a commitment to look at new technologies, maybe cloud-based technologies, maybe small apps that the residents can use to bring in their concerns to the county, and not in the traditional way that we've been doing it for 10 years. my recommendation, the response I got in the question I raised was, we're working on it and hopefully next year. And I'm saying next year is 2021, 22. That's way too long. So my first recommendation is for this committee to endorse a request by the executive to accelerate the plan to look at alternate technologies that can perhaps bypass some of the bottlenecks and some of the inefficiencies with newer levels of technology. The second recommendation is to look at the workload and the staffing that's been made. Another disturbing statistic, and I hate to kind of continue this, on page 6, 25% is the current absentee rate. That's a real challenge to any manager, that he or she cannot expect that more than 75% of the people who are scheduled to arrive. So these are kind of management issues, and this is why I suggest, I totally agree with Mr. Friedson, I suggested on page 5 on the top that the executive needs to reposition the program itself. So a utilization study is something that would be very useful to start understanding why is the system so bad, while at the same time we accelerate the look for technology. So again, it's a very awkward position. The system isn't working. The council is not given enough time to react. You know, something comes over on March 15th. You have 2 months to review. This is certainly going to take some time. I did raise the seminal question, which is the executive behind this program?
Right.
We know that the previous executive had kind of a vision to use this for a variety of purposes, holding departments accountable, the SLAs, the infamous SLAs. So I raised that question, and the answer we received back is that yes, indeed, the executive is still committed to this program. Again, the proof is in the pudding.
Appropriate to, when we make a recommendation for the budget, to include language in the resolution that states that we expect this particular service to be moved out of the PIO into, let's say, the digital officer, unit or something. I mean, is that something that we can explore?
I could certainly explore it with both OMB and the executive branch, absolutely.
Okay. So if you can get that answer for us, because, I
Right.
mean, it's going to be way too difficult to, for us to sit here and try to propose where it should be. But I think there is no doubt that the management issue is definitely a problem. And it is a significant investment. I think also included in the performance, utilization and staffing, maybe benchmarking with other jurisdictions to see where they are, because, I mean, we were doing that at the very beginning. So I think perhaps it might be a good time to take a look at that and what they have done to address some of these issues. But the piece about, where it lives, I think it's also fair to say that, I mean, the executive recognized that DTS plays a role, but that it should have a digital information officer as well to kind of look at more like innovative programming and things like that. So if he's recognized that, then perhaps that's where this could naturally live, as you pointed out in your packet.
And there's also a new Office of Productivity and Innovation being planned, and County Stat is another possible location. I would also like to point your attention to page 2, and that's my last comment, kind of middle of page 2, about the OLO report. There's some help that the council itself is trying to provide to the executive branch by
Right.
having our OLO do an actual performance study. So the OLO staff are here. My hope is that we'll have some results within 3-4 months, maybe. Is that an accurate assumption? And they will be looking specifically at performance, benchmarking, so we're going to have some data from our side, whether the executive branch can be convinced to do that or not. I know that there's a lot of priorities across the street, so we're going to do our best on the staff side.
Well, that would be a good time for us to do another check-in then, to see, where we are and how things have progressed. And then again, I think, because I do feel strongly that if we're going to do something, we need to do it right. We just cannot be in the business of spending this much money and not having an optimal outcome. It's just not the way we should do everything. Okay, so if the committee,
Quickly, I'd ask to add to
yes,
Thank you.
yeah.
In the conversations you have with the executive branch, if you could add in how 311, wherever it ultimately is housed, how the data from it, because I see one of the main, benefits of this, besides streamlining it in one place and having it, should be that we have data, and the county executive and his CAO have, talked a lot about the outcomes-based budgeting, but what does that look like? Just what's their vision for how we're going to use the data, which could help us on the Government Operations Committee, not just with 311, but I think in all of the evaluation that we're doing and all of the different policy areas. It would just be helpful to have, an answer of what that vision looks like and how they see this as part of the broader data gathering and outcomes-based budgeting process.
And that was the instructions that we gave county stat vis-a-vis 311, because what we recognized quickly was that this would allow us to understand, for example, if we're getting a lot of calls in a particular part of the county regarding a particular issue, then even when we're doing budgetary decisions, we can use that data, and so we were told, yes, this is what we're gonna use it for, which we're very excited, because it gives you another layer of, predictability and information, and we haven't necessarily, it hasn't really been done.
I would say usually when I have a good idea, it's someone else's idea that's already happened before, and when I have a bad idea, it's my own idea, so.
No, it's because it's just so obvious.
So just.
What's so exciting about this?
If I may address the committee, again, interim director here until they're seeking a new PIO director. Has the committee not received the quarterly performance reports from county stat?
We've done reports.
I think we have received reports. What we asked for was for there to be a analysis done of the data to then give us feedback on what are those issues that seem to come up time and time again. So when we had, for example, storm issues, and we worked so hard with, DOT on a lot of this, we were able to track and see whether whatever fixes or additions we had made had alleviated that in the next one, right? So that was part of what we also wanted to get, and I don't think we have received that, no.
I think part of it is, 301, if it worked, we'd be using 301 to figure out how we fix county government. Right now, we can't fix county government because we don't have 311 fixed. And so we can't get to we don't know where the calls are coming in because a lot of the people are abandoning their calls. So we don't know what's broken in county government. But if this function works as it is supposed to, then we should have a pretty clear indication of where the shortcomings are, and we could direct resources on the executive side. He could exec resources on that side. We could direct resources on our side with funding, our role in this process based on that data and that information. The problem is the system doesn't work. And so the information isn't as, worthwhile as it should be. And so I think that's why I am so interested in it, and obviously that's why my colleagues are as well.
Again, I have to own in the 4 months that I've been on the job, I have to own the communication issue in the 4 months that I've been here. But I would respectfully disagree that the system doesn't work. I do not disagree the system needs a tremendous amount of improvement. But with the percentage of SRs that are completed by the customer service reps, there's a system here that needs to be improved, but it's a system that does work. Again, I cannot stress enough that there's no daylight between you and me, that there is great room for improvement, that people are not being serviced. I can't run away from an 11% abandonment rate. I can't run away from those numbers. I
think it's fair to say that, in Montgomery County, we have very high standards, and we are never shy of acknowledging that we need to improve. That's what this conversation is about. So, I think it's best to leave it at that. I think that we have very high expectations from our constituents, and we work very hard to meet those. And so this is a good opportunity to find, a different set of, perhaps a different model in terms of where it should reside, et cetera, to get to that point where our constituents can feel confident that this is a worthwhile investment. As I said earlier, because if that's not the case, then I don't think it should be worth us having this. So that's where we need to get to, and I think that we can engage in that very specific conversation with the committee. Having said that, is the committee's, any objection with accepting the
You would accept the budget,
regarding
come back and tell you
with the language
what will be
regarding-
done
Exactly.
in the next 12 months.
Exactly, yes.
Need the money regardless.
Thank you, correct, yes, we don't want to interrupt anything at this point. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you.